You have your supervisor. You're a part of a research team. You research, you develop, you learn. But at one point, it's time to break free. It's time to develop your own ideas and develop your own team. But when and how? That is what we'll discuss here today. Welcome to the Science Conversations at NTNU and today's topic, how to gain autonomy beyond your PhD. They started out as PhD candidates, and today they have successful academic careers. They will share with us some of their experiences on their road to independence. With me today are Therese Løvaas, James Speed, Tone Button. Welcome. Tone, let's start with you. Was there some defining moments in your academic career when you felt, now I am independent, I am ready to take the next step?
Yes, actually I think so. It was at a point in my life where a lot of things happened at the same time. I was offered a position as a full professor at NTNU. I took over the lead of the research group that I'm also currently managing. And at the same time, I also received a very nice grant from the Research Council. And I mean, this is still less than 10 years ago. And I think how and when people feel that they've gained autonomy is very individual. It varies from person to person.
Mm. And you're a professor in medicine. Do you think, is that sort of a typical way that you've road that you follow there, or does it vary from research field to research field?
I think there are some specific things for the Faculty of Medicine. I have to specify that I'm not a professor. I am a professor in medicine, but I am not a medical doctor. But still can work with medical research. So I guess there are some differences at the medical faculty. Maybe, well, yeah, that you have to learn how to do medical research and all the legal and ethical issues that are associated with it. That's really can be challenging, and it's a landscape that is constantly changing, so you have to adapt. And it's very interdisciplinary research, but I guess that's also common for the other faculties.
Yeah. Well, let's start with you, Therese. How does one gain autonomy within your field of research?
Yeah, so my field of research is more the technical disciplines. Personally, I work in a very perhaps specific field called combustion, but in the technical disciplines, we typically work on research projects closely related to industry. And I would say that autonomy is something that comes with experience. The typical research project that we see in our field is very well defined in advance, even before the project starts. There's industry partners involved that has expectations of specific deliverables in the projects. And both PhD students and postdocs are a natural group of people to involve in that research project. So gaining your own independence when working under that sort of, say, framework is difficult because you have the balance between the deliverables that's expected both from the partners and of course also the funding body. But within that framework, there should be possibilities for own ideas on how to solve the problems at hand. And personally, I felt autonomy only when I was in a position where I had a permanent position after a few postdocs.
Yeah, because that can take a couple of years within academia. So you had several postdoc positions then?
Yeah, for me, I had 2 postdoc positions after my PhD working under different professors. I learned a lot from them. I was part of their team. got more and more responsibility from the professor, but still it was important to deliver on the project. That was part of my goal, to deliver as high quality research I could in that project. That gave me the opportunity to apply for positions at different universities as a permanent faculty staff. Had to send a few applications, that was turned down. That's almost ended up in industry. But finally I was offered a position at a university, and then I was standing on my own 2 feet, and I had to trust my own ideas.
How about you, James? Do you trust your own ideas?
Yes, of course. So to me, autonomy is to do the research that you want to do, rather than the research that you are told to do. And by doing that, you're able to kind of carve out your own niche. You can become then the recognized expert in a maybe quite small subfield. But then the following steps mean that then others will naturally come to you to collaborate.
But you have heard Tone and Therese talk about some different fields of research. You're an associate professor within natural history. Do you see any differences or other?
I think it's more similarities than differences in the main.
Yeah. But how did you go about? Were there some defining moments in your career? What happened?
Yeah, so I moved countries, actually, between my PhD and my postdoc. I did my PhD at Aberdeen in Scotland, and then I came over here for a postdoc. Then I was able to establish my independence during the postdoc, largely through the institutional frameworks which are in place. I applied for and got one of the Research Council's Young Research Talent projects a few years ago. And I was also invited to be part of the NTNU Outstanding Academic Fellows programme. And both of those really gave me a very good basis through seminars, discussions with others in similar career stages and similar statuses to develop my own independence, my own research group.
So you actively work to get to all this, to get to the next step. You applied for these to become part of this program. It didn't actually come by itself.
It didn't, but at the same time, gaining autonomy was not my actual ambition. It wasn't my aim. My target was to do the research I wanted to do, and then the autonomy came with that.
Yeah. Was that the same for you, Tone? It just came, or did you sort of have to work actively for it?
It was it more or less came. Yes, it's not something that was I would say specifically that I thought about or that my supervisor specifically discussed with me, but it happened. I think maybe we can be better in discussing these issues now, and that there are actually systems being set up now that will benefit the young researchers.
Is this something you discuss with the young researchers in your teams? Is there a sort of plan for independency? Teresa?
Yeah, I think now what Tone is saying is very true, that we should be better to address this. Now, me talking as a professor, I have a group of PhDs and postdocs, and certainly when the postdocs, come to a certain level, it's very natural to talk about this. I think it's I'm happy when they come to me to ask for advice about exactly this. Now there is some more formalities around it. With postdocs, we are required to have a postdoc plan for them. It's an exercise where they themselves write a plan. It's a document. The document in itself is not the aim or the goal, but it is what it does, what you get with it, that while writing out this plan, you have to think for yourself. In dialogue with your professor, you will define a plan, and that dialogue is the aim, I think. that you have openly spoken together. You have a common understanding of what it takes. The postdoc gets advice of what is important to emphasize. And it's something that you should talk about, not just that once and have a plan in a drawer somewhere, but it's something that you look at every now and then to see, am I on the way that was planned?
But so what is the actual goal of autonomy here? Like why and when do you need to be autonomous as a researcher?
Well, I think I agree with what both Tone and James have said, that autonomy in itself is not the aim. You can go all the way back to the Greeks to define, autonomy and the freedom of thoughts, the academic ambition of fruitful thought that brings science forward. But autonomy in today's research field or the way research is conducted today has become more to some extent almost a quantitatively measure that almost unfortunately is something that can feel like a pressure for the young researchers. I agree very much with what you, James, says, that really autonomy is not the goal. The goal is to do the research that interests you. That should be the driver for everyone, really. But then the system around how research is conducted, how research is funded, how positions are available for you, it suddenly becomes almost a qualification in itself, and that can be problematic to balance.
I would like to hear from you, James. What are your thoughts on the sort of goals of autonomy? I guess you have to have some sort of autonomy to be able to do the research that you're burning to do.
Yes, well, early career stage researchers often have the ambition of becoming qualified to lead their own research group, to carry out their own research. And that's the ultimate goal in many cases. And it's the responsibility of the project leader, the PI, the supervisor of PhDs and postdocs to ensure that the early career stage researchers have the opportunities to develop in this way. There's at least one environment where it can be important to demonstrate your autonomy. For example, when you are applying for funding from research councils. Some of them, the European Research Council, for example, often highlight or ask applicants to highlight the papers which they have written without their PhD supervisors.
So to have written a publication with only your supervisor, would that be a good or a bad thing within your field of research? I guess this varies a bit.
I suppose you shouldn't only publish with your supervisor, but during the PhD, I think it's natural that you publish with your supervisor. You're in a research training position. You're learning how to conduct research. But then moving on to a postdoc, then maybe it's possible to find gaps where you can publish without your supervisor. But it really depends on the project that funds your salary. I mean, if you're hired in as a postdoc and the aims and milestones and deliverables, the research to be done was laid out up front, it's not so much to do about it. But I mean, there is this independence you can have in how to solve the tasks, and as long as you can assure a good and open dialogue with your supervisor, maybe you're able to find some flexible gaps here. Add in a stay abroad. Maybe you can publish with them without your supervisor. But I think this dialogue with your supervisor, with your mentor, that's kind of the key issue here.
But I'll just go back to you there, James. But as you have you applied for these different with the NFR and the NTNU program, you had obviously shown your independence. How had you gone about to do that? Had you published together with others, other than your supervisors?
I had, but I had moved between my PhD and my postdoc, and I'd also been participating in various networks, either formal or informal, with colleagues I met at conferences and so on. So yes, my CV at that stage already had it had publications with a range of different collaborators and co-authors, and I think that's important because then you can kind of show your signature, if you like, or your scientific fingerprints across the studies which you have produced. Whereas if you have only published with one group and you're at a senior postdoc level, then it's going to be very hard for evaluators to kind of disentangle what is the postdoc's contribution to the work and what comes from the senior professor.
But how, like, in practical terms, how do you go about to do this? Do you approach someone, you go to a conference, you approach someone like, hi, would you like to do a publication with me? Or how?
I think you start with the idea, the idea of the paper you want to write or the study you wish to conduct. And then you find the right people who have the complementary skills to kind of fill the gaps that maybe you're missing. And then.
But where do you find them? Conferences, Google?
Both of those, but probably even more so just from being up to date with the literature, by knowing who is working on what at any given time. And then it will become apparent who to contact.
So I sense there that to have a network and to sort of be visible in this network is quite important. I guess this is something you've been thinking about too, Therese.
Yeah, I think that is very important, that you have a network. And again, it's not something that you just decide to get, and when you go to a conference you decide that, okay, this is the conference that I'm going to get my network. It happens naturally as part of discussions. I inherited to some extent the network that I still have from the supervisor I had from my PhD. By joining the conferences, listening to the discussions. Okay, I was a young PhD at the time, but in the discussions with the different people we happened to meet at the conferences, you learn from the discussions, you get to know the people, you meet them again, you continue the discussion, perhaps the year after, and in that way you build a network. And I think when it comes to the point of being so specific that you have a plan for a specific paper or perhaps even a proposal, it is based on these informal discussions you happen to have at conferences. I think now a lot of collaborative research across groups and countries is based on this informal interaction. Writing a paper with someone is based on that you find a common interest in a problem. You see you can solve better together because you bring in different knowledge. And it's, as far as I can see, more a natural part of being a member of a scientific community and not something you specifically decide to. Sometimes you realize, oh, I need someone to solve a specific part of the problem, and you contact them directly. Hi, are you interested in this? Shall we try to solve this problem together? And it results in a paper. I think when you receive this type of a request from someone, being already known is an advantage. It is difficult for someone to set off time to a totally unknown person. So again, being known as part of a group, working with certain professors will give you a way in to also working with other groups.
So I hear that both formal and informal networks and communication is important, but how do you do that now during a pandemic? Because there are so many young researchers struggling with that. Have you found some methods that work?
Well, I mean, you still have the conferences, they're digital, and it's developed. You have meeting rooms there. It's not the same. And I feel bad for some of our PhDs now who's never really attended a really good physical conference where they meet up with people. But well, you need to involve your PhDs and postdocs in the projects, like you've already addressed. Like in the project meetings, we have digital project meetings. That maybe that's even a benefit for later, that we've now become more comfortable with these tools and we can save a lot of travel. But involve them in everything. There is so much to learn. But about these networks and collaborators, one thing which I think is also really interesting now is that all the major scientific societies, they have a stronger focus on the early career researchers now. They have their own early career research networks, events, where the young researchers are lifted up, I mean, to take actively part in what to discuss and what to arrange, making those events. And that's also a great arena to build good networks for now and for future. Mm.
So networks is an important part. I think that, well, I was wondering, Therese, if you had been, if you were a young PhD or postdoc today, what were some of the measures you would have taken apart from just, or practical measures you would have taken apart from just doing as much quality research as you could?
Well, I think truly that at an early stage, producing high quality research is, it is very much and it's also at the time, if you end up in academia, it's perhaps the time of your career where you can devote yourself only to research. So I often say that, try to protect this time also for defining your research expertise. What is the field that I really burn for? Okay, I'm a combustion scientist, I can say that. And try to learn as much as you can from your professor and from the close network that you are among, because in later stages, if you continue in academia, you unfortunately come to a point where you are not as much hands-on. But as a young postdoc, I think learning from being there, as Tone was saying, participate in the project meetings, to learn, to listen to the discussions, to be exposed to the dilemmas, and perhaps also learn from what dilemmas your professor is faced on in order to successfully conduct the project, and try to be part of something. Research today is so competitive. I think that's also something you have to make a personal and actually a conscious decision about. Can I strive? Does this totally stress me out, or is it something that gives me motivation? It's something that I think also should be discussed with the postdocs and possibly the PhDs choosing whether to continue with the postdoc. That research today is competitive. Even the most high-profile professors get turned down. They get their papers back with terrible reviews. It's not about necessarily you personally, but it is so competitive that that sometimes it's not successful, and you have to decide: shall I try again, or choose a different career, which can absolutely be just as fruitful and exciting.
You mentioned dilemmas. I guess that in a situation where you have a postdoc working on a project with a professor, there might be, well, the professor expects something from the postdoc, perhaps the postdoc thinks or have high hopes for independency. That I guess there will be some sort of tension here, or a dilemma for the professor. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is lots of room for tension here, but I think this is where you need to have an open dialogue, and you have to look for these flexible pockets for where the postdoc can have opportunities to work on the independency or autonomy. But I mean, it is really a balance, because you have the deliverables. But one good measure could be to involve the PhDs and postdocs in the planning of a project. They may have brilliant ideas to bring in, and that also enables them to have maybe a sort of impact on the project to be carried out. And if this is for their postdoc position, maybe it's also easier to show that you have ambitions. You want to travel abroad, or you want to include this. So yeah, involve the candidates early on, also in the proposal writing, in the planning and carrying out.
We have a question from the audience concerning conflicting interests between postdocs and professors when it comes to the postdoc's autonomy. We won't comment on specific cases, but do you have any general thoughts on this, James?
I completely agree with Tuna that the professors have to find the balance between making sure the project achieves its deliverables, meets the milestones, and so on, but at the same time living up to the responsibility of ensuring that the early stage career researchers get the support they need to develop into independent researchers themselves.
We will move on to another question from the audience. I'll ask you, James. Do you think it is a disadvantage to move to a different city or university after the postdoc?
No,
Apparently not.
I don't think that's a disadvantage at all if it fits for your situation. It's always good to work in different environments, to be exposed to different ways of thinking, different scientific philosophies, as well as to work with new people, different people. So I can only see that as a positive. And I don't think it's so important whether you move between PhD and postdoc, or between postdoc and second postdoc, or even between postdoc and permanent position. Just getting that exposure to different ways of thinking can only be beneficial to your scientific development.
Therese, I'll ask the next question to you. Is it easier to get a permanent position at the university than the same position now? Is it easier to get a permanent position at the university where you do your postdoc? I guess that can vary.
As in to apply for a permanent position somewhere else, I don't think there's any sort of trends at all. From my experience, both my own experience and also in my role now as head of department, where we are recruiting permanent, new permanent staff. What James was saying, that having the experience from different groups, different labs, I would in my world it's also different labs. It automatically gives you a broader perspective of the field that you are working in, and that is an advantage. Not per se, it's not in itself that okay, this person has moved around, but it shows in the research they have conducted that they are exposed to different methods, they are exposed to different approaches, and that is shown in their, say, competence.
But is this something you discuss with your postdocs when they approach the end of term and or end of period, and where to go from there?
Oh yes. When my postdocs come to a point where they start to really feel that they need to think about the next step, I have always spoken to them about what they plan to do. I am also honest about that. I am not able to necessarily continue them at NTNU in my group, because that depends on funding, and it's so uncertain whether we will be successful or not in our proposals. So that's something that I have an open dialogue with them about. For all it's worth, I give them advice on what to do next. If they happen to have several opportunities, we discuss what will be the benefits or the risks, or I welcome that dialogue. I try to help them as much as I can to develop further, and I see them as new collaborators. I'm not losing them just because they move away from my group, sort of physically, but they become new partners, potential partners in new project ideas.
Did you want to comment, James?
Yes, if I can. I think these issues we talk about are common across academia internationally as well, but where it's a little bit different in Norway is the geographical density of universities is so low. I mean, even within the area encompassed by the NTNU campuses, if you went to the UK, say, or Germany, there could be 5 or 6 different universities within the same geographical area, which makes it a lot easier to move around with less disruption to one's family life.
That's a good point. But talking about the differences between countries, have you do they see autonomy differently in different countries or at different universities? What's your experience on that?
Well, my experience is limited to just the 2 countries, but I think, at least in the UK, it's actually more expected that one will move at some point during one's career. In Norway, there's obviously fewer universities, and one could very easily find themselves in the best research environments for them from the very beginning of their education or career. And then it doesn't really make sense to go anywhere else if you already find yourself at the best place.
Oh, how about you, Therese? You've also been to various universities. Do they look at autonomy differently?
I also have, I have three countries I have experience from, but I have to say also, when I think of my friends and colleagues in other European countries, I think autonomy per se is not talked about as a sort of entity in the same way as perhaps we are even doing now here. It is more part of the scientist's maturity. I've said this before, but it can sort of be compared to when is your child ready to move away from home, and that is individual. It depends on the relationship you have with your, say, scientific parents. It depends on the opportunities that are there, culture. So the difference, if anything, is that it's not outspoken as an sort of a career qualification, as perhaps we are doing here, but becomes part of their maturity, or their perceived maturity from their scientific peers.
We're talking about autonomy, independence, but as a researcher, you cannot ever be truly independent, can you, to get anything done?
No, I think that's a good statement, actually, because you need a lot of people working together to reach a goal, to reach milestones you've set, and research has become very interdisciplinary, and so there are so many things you need to learn. You need to learn how to build the networks, how to succeed with the research proposals, project management, economy, legal issues, publication, communication to peers and public, and this landscape is also in constant change. But there is so I think you will always depend on others, their knowledge, their advice. But in this, of course, you can develop autonomy and work on these things that you really like to do research on.
It's a big landscape then. And how, James, do you have any sort of practical tools that you use to become visible in this landscape? Is it mostly your publications, or do you use tools like social media?
I don't use social media, and I think I'm in a minority, a shrinking minority there as well. So I rely upon my publications, attending conferences, and networking to get my work out there.
Do you see, Teresa, do you see a difference here between, I don't know, generations of researchers? Do they use the same tools now?
I still think that we are highly dependent on our publications, that what we produce from science is read and picked up on by people who are interested in what we're doing. Today there's so many papers published in a huge number of journals. It's not easy even, for a senior professor to keep track on everything that is going on even in your field. And that's where going to conferences is essential. Talking to people, being pointed to some paper that recently came out of another group. So publishing your own work is extremely important, but also going to the conferences, networking at the conference, listening to people is important, and reaching out to people you might not even know, to start a dialogue and conversation is important. And by that they also learn what you're doing. So I agree with James that still publishing, going to conferences and networking is probably the most important.
But I would guess that social media could be useful tools just for the networking.
I see now that the younger, I see that now that the younger generation, they have their Twitter, they have their, they have their ways, web pages, things like that, where they also make themselves visible. So perhaps I'm just of the older generation.
Or maybe I can comment. Because I think also, of course, I agree to what you say. But there is another arena that is actually important, and that's because as researchers, and we use public funding to do our research, we also have an obligation to bring, to communicate our research and the results to the general public. And I'm not saying I'm doing it a lot or being particularly good at it, but I think that's also a way to become, to be seen, and also something that you can be evaluated on when you apply new project funding, that you can show that you're able to convey your results to a general public with a good language, understandable.
It's a good thing. I will move on to another question from the audience. I will ask you to try to answer, Tone. How should a research group be established? Is it more a result of grant application, which opens PhD positions, or did you start as a group, for instance, of postdocs that decided to collaborate on a topic?
I guess there's no single solution to this, I guess. So for me, I became head of the research group because I took over from my mentor at one point in time. But that being said, I have several autonomous, independent researchers working within my group, where they have their PhDs and their postdocs. Sometimes we publish together, sometimes we don't, and it's I think because it's something about being big enough that you have some power, that you have some kind of call it backup funding or possibility to exchange a bit. So if you are bigger, you have more flexibility. But then it's possible to establish kind of a research group within this framework. And that can very well be based on a successful proposal to the Research Council or ERC or other funding available.
Was this something you agree with, James?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there are very differing forms of research groups. You can have what's known as a rocket model research group with a senior professor at the top and his or her postdocs and PhDs kind of all behind giving the thrust to the group. Or you can have a group which operates more, I think they call it like a community of stars, where it's just a constellation of different researchers who find different interests when they align now and again.
So that could be the last one you mentioned could be perhaps a nice way to start for young researchers, perhaps easier then.
Yeah, that model fits very well to like a bottom-up type of network, perhaps one which could be inspired from one of these early career conferences and events, as Tone mentioned earlier in the discussion.
We are approaching the end, so I would like you to think about some take-home messages for the audience. Do you have some of those, Teres?
Yes, I think, as I said, autonomy in itself is not the goal. It's about the experience you gain by collaborating in a group. Of course, you collaborate with your professor, but you hopefully also have other PhDs and postdocs in the group that you also collaborate with. I know that for some this is not easy, but getting experience from other labs, other groups, even if it's a shorter stay, being exposed to other ways of doing it is very important to trigger your ideas, new thoughts. So any go-away message would be to use the opportunities that come to hand. Also be patient. I think that is an important message, that in this competitive field of research that we are in, one also has to be a bit of patient, both towards himself, but also to when opportunities arises.
Thank you. James, what about you?
I completely agree. Put the research first and the autonomy will follow. Say yes to the opportunities that come along to allow you to broaden your network, to meet new people. And don't be scared to put yourself out there and to meet new people, even if you are an introvert. It can be very inspiring to meet, to work with, to discuss people who are like-minded and share common interests.
Thank you. What are you, Tone?
Keep a good and continuous dialogue and communication with your supervisor. Align your expectations. And supervisors should always take their responsibility as a mentor serious.
So, gaining independence is an important part of a research career, but it's not necessarily easy. As always, there are no absolutes, but as we have heard here today, hold the dialogue with your supervisor, expand your horizon, learn as much as you can within the framework you're in, learn different network methods, and develop your network. And you have a valuable foundation. This was the last of the science conversations for now. Thank you for following us, and if you want to learn more of any of the topics that we have discussed during the sessions, go to the Science Conversations webpage. Thank you.